We hear a lot about well-intentioned efforts by nonprofits and donors that do more harm than good. So this can be related. And the anecdote I've heard is the free mosquito nets that are provided that put the mosquito net makers out of business. So how does your organization address this problem of kind of unintended consequences in international philanthropy? And related to that, I guess, when something doesn't work, how are you evaluating what you're doing?
I can tell you an example that we're living with right now. So the Omo Valley is really cut by the Omo River, which runs 400 miles, and there's villages along the Omo River that are these very traditional places where people rely on cattle and goats. And again, no clean water, no medical care, completely isolated. Just recently, the cell phone service has gotten there, though, so we're seeing cell phones come to a place where kids are dying of measles.
It's crazy.
Which twists your mind up. I mean, you see so much, it's really hard to process sometimes. But a couple years ago, without naming any names, there was a international NGO that came in. They were affiliated with a European country, and they put in a clean water project. And it was a way to bring water out of the river and clean the water. And they built a whole apparatus and so forth. And it really never worked the way it was laid out on paper by the engineer, Neil.
On paper, everything's perfect.
Yeah. And so today we're left with this apparatus, this huge structure it's an environmental eyesore. It's not delivering clean water. And I'm communicating back and forth with these folks trying to get help. And you're in an isolated part of the world. And you want to bring clean water to a place where people are dying of diarrhea and dysentery and cholera and all this. But that's an example where without proper follow-up, like the wells you talked about that you drill, after 2 or 3 years, if they go dry, then what happens? Are they ignored? Does anybody come back?
So I think this is really a key issue, because as donors living in Southern California, going back to that first question, why should we give overseas? Maybe one reason not to is we just can't keep track of what's going on. And you have either unintended consequences or you have an ill-defined strategy. And I suspect this is something you have to deal with a lot as you think about, right? How are you successful, and then how do you build the confidence among your donors
That it's all going to work.
That it's going to work.
Yeah. John and I have both seen this. It's a big factory. It's on Lake Turkana. In the Turkana district of northern Kenya. It cost about, again, you hear different numbers, $14 to $20 million to build. The Norwegians built it. Great people. They do great development stuff. Not that time. Never canned a single fish, right? The plan was overblown. The equipment was too complicated. No one figured out that the road from here, from the Turkana district down to Nairobi is too dangerous to travel without a police escort, so you needed to escort the trucks. There were all sorts of problems. What it was somebody 6,000 miles away had an idea, right? Someone up in Oslo had an idea of how they were going to fix things. That doesn't work. It doesn't work. And we know it doesn't work now. But we spent decades doing development that way. An NGO would get together with a government funder, and they decide that, let's build all of these schools. Yeah, but schools need teachers, and all of these kinds of things. But it made everyone feel good, right? It was a feel-good kind of thing. Most groups today have much fewer problems with that, most development groups. Not everybody, but but the majority of people have far fewer problems with that. PCI has very little problem with that. We do try things out, and they don't work sometimes. We've had some educational programs that trying to train people, and we say at the end of it, that didn't work as well as the other training program we had. So forget that one. We measured it. It's no good. We'll go back. We'll do it over again. But the main thing is connection with the community. Not only the identity of the problem, but the solution to the problem has got to boil up from the community. Now, obviously, some communities don't have all of the technical or scientific information, and we supply that. But we sit down with the people in the village, in the urban neighborhood. We find out from them what are the problems and rank them. What's the most important problem? There's a pretty much a famous example. This isn't PCI, but it's one you'll see in all of the books. There's a process called community-led total sanitation. And you go into a community and you form different groups of people and you talk about water and sanitation and what they want to do first, right? The example is, it was a small village in India, and the first thing they wanted was water to their temple so that they could do ritual washing before they worship. And there were kids dying of diarrheal diseases down in the village, right? So the CLTS leader goes, well, your answer is wrong. The answer is that we got to put this water system in the village, and they put the water system in the village. And nobody in the village was interested in the water system. No one paid for any of the water. No one formed a committee to make that well and the piping system sustainable, collect a penny or two from everybody every month, and put someone in charge. And so when the water system broke, it was broke. No one gave a rat's whatever about it, and the whole project was a failure. Now, another person would have, a person who understood the process would have said, okay, we're going to put water into the temple first, and we're going to do it really fast so that we don't lose any more children in the month or 6 weeks or so it's going to take to put this water system in. And we're going to do it exactly the way you want to. And then we're all together going to go down and do the village water system and stop these kids from getting sick. When you do it that way, the villagers say, this is my water system. Okay, these guys helped, but yeah, they're going away. This is my water system, and I'm willing to pay a penny, and I want it, and I will support it, and we'll form a group that will make sure that this is sustainable. And when you do it that way, hey, you can go back 10 years later, that water system's still there. If you go in there and tell these people what you need is a well, and we're going to drill it right here, and it's going to have a pump handle this long, and it's going to look like this, 3 years later, that well's broken. In Africa right now, 1/3 of every single well we've ever drilled is broken and non-operating. And we only, have really started to do this over the past, decade and a half, where we've concentrated much, much more on the people in the community and listened. And it's the key to everything. It's the key to doing it right.
Okay, just a quick observation building on that and kind of touching two different things. Like you asked a question of how do you know when things go wrong and what's that look like? And then also how do you do no harm? So on the how do you know when things go wrong, again, I'm sort of the guy with a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So digital does help. It does help. And we're lucky, we get to see, and so I'll tell you a story of a sort of early failure. We saw in one of our earliest programs in Ghana, one of the things we do is when we work in schools, we encourage the teachers to allow the students to take their e-readers home at night. You know, that's when a lot of learning happens, right? People talk about thinking outside the box. We talk about, you know, sort of educating outside the classroom, right? A lot of that happens outside. However, what happens? Well, kids go home, they mess around with them, they read a little bit, they, you know, show them to their siblings, blah, 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 blah. So what do we find? We found that the usage rate was declining over time, and we were puzzled. And so, because we can see the use. So we looked at it a little more closely, and we have an office and across, we have local community and local buy-in. Anyway, we found it, and it turns out that 40%, hello, of the devices had broken in a particular community. That's a disaster. Now, what do you do? So first of all, quick story, at the time we were buying our devices using an American Express card. Phenomenal. Extended warranty, it's absolutely fantastic. American Express became sort of like an unknown donor to WorldReader. A warranty program. We appreciate that very much. So that was nice. But what we started to do is by the way, at the time we were using Kindle 3s. Does anyone have the ones with the keyboard? Anyone here read on Kindle and have those with keyboard? Yeah. They were not very reliable units. So we did two things. Number one, we actually did three things. Number one, we did a whole community training program on how to take care of the Kindle. And we literally said, imagine it's like a mirror. We had a kind of what we call the egg drop test, which sort of how high would you hold an egg. Like, we told them don't sit on it like this. A lot of them would sit on it like this because they didn't want someone else to take it, so don't do that. So that was one of it. It's kind of some root cause analysis. Number two, we sent a bunch of Kindles back to Amazon. And we said, guys, you have a problem here. Particularly this pressure is causing a problem. And so they actually redesigned their Kindle, in part because of that feedback we showed them. And number three, and this was the hardest decision we made, we published that data. We published it on our learning section, and we said we have this program, and we have very high breakage rates and so forth. In a sense, to report both to our donors and our supporters, and also to sort of hold ourselves accountable for it. And said, the economics don't work. American Express is very generous, but we can't. That's not part of the long-term business model. Then the unintended consequences thing. I think what you were talking about, Neil. Partnership with local communities in a way that gives them a real stake in the success of it really matters. And our example, which I won't talk about at any length now, but we can talk about after if you're interested, is we work with local publishers, to your question, John, and we pay those publishers for the rights to use their books. We pay them on the order of 70 cents per book per device, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you add it up, that could be a $5,000 check, a $15,000 check, a $20,000 check, and we digitize their books for them and give them the files. Why? Because this helps them go digital, but it also means they're implicated in this. They want to see this program succeed. And so now, for in some publishers' case, we're the largest, certainly the largest digital buyer, in some cases one of the largest customers. So if you can, everyone talks about community engagement, and we are very serious about that, but there's a certain amount of embedding yourself in the economics of the community, that if you can turn that to your sort of advantage, honestly, where when they do well, you do well, that creates a certain sustainability, which reduces the risk a lot of doing harm, because you're actually very demonstrably doing good in the community.
John?
I would just say one thing too. I think a lot of the same issues that you ask about international organizations are giving, you also have to ask about what's going on right here in San Diego. You know, I'm giving to this club or that group, and what are they doing with their money?
Right.
And what percentage is for dinners at Bentley's or whatever, and how much is actually going to the programs. I think that's